and there may be members of the public here. So just to be clear, I'm addressing the Grant Review Committee during this meeting. If you're a member of the public, there is an opportunity for public comment towards the end of the meeting. So please wait if you have any questions or comments until that public comment period. And then from here on out, I'm just going to be addressing the GRC. As usual, GRC members, our chat is going to be turned off. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or interrupt vocally so we can get your discussion on record and make sure we answer any questions that come up. So we will be discussing the single final application that we have in detail today. If you have any questions about the application, please, direct it to me or the other CJC staff that's on this meeting and not the grantee directly. Again, just so we can get that captured appropriately. And as usual, please let me know if I miss anything, move on too soon during a discussion or whatever. Just in the spirit of full disclosure, I have been feeling a little under the weather for the past day or so. So I'm going to be relying on you folks even more heavily than usual just to make sure we cover everything and get a robust discussion on this application. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's our agenda for today. Similar to last time, we're going to be going through the introductions and roll call and roles and expectations, et cetera, pretty quickly. Just so in case anyone has any questions, we've seen that information a few times now, so hopefully it'll be familiar to all of you. I do want to note that towards the end of the meeting, this number 5 here on the agenda is a discussion around the remaining 2023-25 allocations. So we will need a few minutes towards the end for that. And then we'll be talking about next steps. So let's go ahead and do the introductions and roll call. Looks like we got a couple more folks on the call. So I'm just going to call out your name. I know that there's a couple folks that said they wouldn't be able to attend today and some folks that were traveling, et cetera, that may be able to join us later in the call. So let's go ahead and get started. Tyler, are you here today?
I am present.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Rob, I believe mentioned was out. Aaron Felton. Aaron, no. All right. Chris, are you in attendance?
Yes, I'm on.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Lauren. Okay. Looks like Lauren is not on yet either. Kathy. Kathy. All right. Craig, were you able to join us? Nope. Constantine. Shannon, are you present today?
I am. Hi.
Hi, Shannon. Welcome. And Tim. I know he mentioned he might be able to call in later, so. All right. So it looks like we have just a few members here. I think we're going to go ahead and go through the presentation. We have a little bit more flexibility with the marijuana grant. So as long as we can still have, a good discussion with the folks that are here, and in case anyone else calls on or calls in later, I think we can go ahead and proceed. So let's get started. Roles and expectations. Again, this should all look very familiar. Our process is just to have the staff do our initial review and outreach and all of that. Those pieces of the application review. Your folks' role is to look at the final application, provide recommendations, and then that information is going to be presented to the commission, who makes the ultimate decision in this case. here's the information again on conflicts of interest. We did not identify any conflicts of interest among members last time, so please just give a shout out or let me know if any folks have since decided that there's a conflict of interest or possible conflict of interest that they would like to disclose. Is there anyone who falls under that category? All right, I don't see anyone. Yep. So just a quick reminder of our process, background, and timeline so far. So we are on this 2023-25 allocation, which added an additional 5 million to our normal 6 million in funding for a total appropriation of 11 million for this biennium funding period. We did go through that process and allocate about 9.3 million to maintain or expand our current programs. And I'll have a little update on that later. We're in this process to allocate that remaining 1.7 million to new applicants through this request for grant proposals process. And then, since we do have just a single applicant that responded to that RFGP, we do have some leftover funds in that 1.7 million. So we're going to be discussing today what your recommendations are to allocate that remaining money. So just a reminder, here's the program operating guidelines. Again, we went all through the applicant or the application to check adherence for all these things. So we don't have to go into much detail at this point. Eligible applicants were cities and counties and community-based organizations. Just a reminder, the applicant that we got is a community-based organization with an active 501c3 status. And here's a reminder of our funding priorities, and then this additional funding priority to prioritize up to $400,000 for CBOs that apply to provide those services that we support with this program based on the feedback from you guys. That was the additional priority for this particular RFGP cycle. And we did, our single applicant thankfully is in this area, so fits in with your priority. So that's a bit of nice news and alignment there. And our timeline again, so we are on August 7th here. We're looking at the final application to develop funding recommendations. Later this month, we have a commission meeting scheduled for the 28th, and we will be presenting whatever recommendations you folks give today to the commission, and then they're going to make the final award on the 28th. So again, this is just our process that we went through. The only new thing here is we did this number 5 in addition to what we already did previously. Looking over the application, we did a review of the applicant responses to your questions and the proposed budget that they submitted that wasn't part of the preliminary application. So we just did a few additional steps as part of the staff review. We went back to the scoring rubric just to make sure that our staff review followed, a kind of common procedure. So there were some additional points that were allocated for those two pieces, the responses to your questions and the budget that we'll get into here momentarily. And so here's the information on our applicant safety compass. None of this was updated because they already provided this information, so we didn't really need to update it. But just as a reminder, they're a new program, a CBO. They're operating primarily in Clackamas, Washington, Marion, Multnomah areas. And the primary purpose of their program that they provided was to coordinate a multidisciplinary meeting with law enforcement, social service providers, et cetera, to help organize service networks for victims of human trafficking impacted by the legal marijuana market. And they were responding primarily to the lack of resources in that area for that target population. And the funds, as we'll see in more detail, are primarily to support this director of labor trafficking who will do that coordination piece. There is an additional piece that would provide support for folks that are impacted by the human trafficking related to the illegal marijuana market. And again, as we saw in the original application, we actually got some additional supporting documentation that shows that they have this broad support already for this program in place. There was a few, letters of support that got submitted with the final application as well. So hopefully folks had a chance to look through those too. As I mentioned, it supports several legislative priorities, including this additional commission priority that we identified for this RFGP cycle. So here is the final score that came from the staff analysis. Again, I highlighted the new pieces here. So, similar to the score for the preliminary application, we did a kind of group process where we scored individually and then averaged. We did miss one of our members was out during the scoring process, so it was only 2 of us for the staff review this time. But we still were able to average those out and kind of do a review to figure out what the strengths and challenges of that final application were. And they kind of scored, like I said, similar to the preliminary application in our eyes, kind of middle of the road. They responded adequately to the questions and prompts, but we still would have liked more detail, I guess, is a good way to summarize it. Any questions or comments before we jump into the details of the budget? Nope. Okay. So the budget was fairly straightforward for this application. The majority of funds that they're requesting is in the category of personnel. And again, it's for that Director of Labor Trafficking position, which is a full FTE, and then a 10% FTE for a volunteer coordinator to help organize volunteers to provide those supportive services. They did include just a small amount of funding for interpretation, which fits in with their, cultural competency piece, and equipment, a computer for that new director position, just a little bit of funds for outreach, brochures and flyers, and then some administrative costs. So were there any comments or questions or concerns with the budget? The total is pretty minimal compared to the total amount available. So they're just requesting 169,857.63. And it looks like Craig may have joined us. So welcome. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. I know
Apologies for
you're
being late, everybody.
yeah, feeling a bit under the weather yourself, so we
Yeah.
definitely appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. You're all glad I'm here and not with you. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, so any questions or comments about the budget? Nope. All right. In that case, so we did, provide kind of a summary of our discussion in these questions from last time. And we tried to tie them into the pieces of the application that they were responding to. And I, hopefully captured what you folks said. I think there is definitely some room for improvement in how they responded. So I just want to state that up front. But let's go through what the questions were and what information they provided in response. And then you folks, please jump in if you still have questions. How adequate you feel the response is to those concerns that folks brought up initially. So I think, in our previous discussion, there was some concern around the program model. So, we tried to ask them for clarification on how the service area, need for services, and proposed program were decided upon, and ask them to include data to support, what the problem statement that they're addressing is and why this specific program model, the going out on scene, the building, collaboration between agencies, why that was decided upon and why that was an appropriate response to that need. So they did give us a little bit of information. They actually cited our reports on kind of the scope of need based on a few different data sources for those counties that they're proposing to operate in, as well as provided some anecdotal evidence from their current work with sex trafficking victims. I think there was some room to provide additional detail. Is that, the staff kind of commented that it didn't specifically address the program model piece of it and why they chose that program model. Any comments or questions on that specific question? No. All right. I see head shaking. And again, I know there were concerns related to that with their current integration and conversations with possible law enforcement partners. They do list out a lot of different partners that they already have in place, and some folks that they know they would need to work with, such as Oregon State Police. But we did want some additional clarification on, possible partners, what their outreach had been, and conversation with them on what their actual needs were in those areas. And they did provide some additional details about their existing partnerships and how they work with those folks, specifically related to the sex trafficking programs that they have in place already. Again, I think we felt that there was a little bit more room to specifically address that question about how those conversations informed their proposed program and why that program model is appropriate. I think that piece is still a question, at least in staff's mind. Just gonna barrel on through like usual, unless anyone interrupts me. So, excuse me. So going on with these application questions, there was a little bit of confusion on how the advocacy and support and housing components kind of fit together and operated with the outreach and collaboration building piece that seemed to be their primary focus. They did provide a solid answer that they put that 10% FTE for the volunteer coordinator to manage the advocacy services, and that they would be utilizing volunteers to provide those services, and they're using the infrastructure they already have, the programming they already have, in place from their existing services, so they wouldn't need funding under this marijuana grant for that piece, just for the coordinator position itself. So that was, a good clarification there. Similarly, we wanted to know what capacity the proposed program had to provide those services. So the already in place services are 24/7, provided through volunteer advocacy, as I mentioned. The services that they specifically talk about are that on-scene response, again, case management, accompaniment to medical care, law enforcement interviews, court, and then access to housing and more. So again, a great additional detail, and those are definitely needed services. Just I think some of it would have been nice in an ideal response to get a little bit more about that humanitarian services that is included in the and more, since we know folks are without a lot of things at that point. But they do already have, a service population that is kind of similar and overlapping. So, and they did provide additional detail. The next question is if they were aware of similar initiatives in those areas that they're proposing to serve, and then how they would connect with those existing services. And they did respond that they're aware of some existing complementary programs, nothing that duplicates what they're proposing to do, but some, existing contacts they have with other community-based and service agencies that they can link in with to help provide those services. Any comments or questions with the responses for those questions that we had? And we'll have more time for discussion after we go through all these as well, so you'll get plenty of chances. So some other questions we had were, really related to this program model. Again, we said other grantees have multiple barriers when have had multiple barriers when attempting to engage victims on scene, and we wanted to get more information on how that outreach and engagement of clients will operate and why this on-scene method was the appropriate method for the intended target population. So they did provide, some good examples of how they could move clients to a secondary location or find a safer way to connect with them if there's folks on scene that aren't safe in that immediate on-scene location. And that discussion of issues seemed to be, based on the narrative they provided, based on their existing experience with the illegal massage businesses and other operations that kind of overlap. But again, I think, and maybe this was on me because I didn't write the question to get the information we were really trying to get, but it wasn't clear about that on-scene piece versus the engagement methods we found other programs to have been more successful, since we started funding CBOs, which is more about community outreach and engaging people away from on-scene. So we didn't really get a response to that, but they did provide some good detail about the safety issues piece of it. So just a couple more questions that we provided to them, and that was more on the budget and program structure. So, and that was what percentage of the FTE would be directed specifically just for addressing the marijuana priorities and activities. And I think there was just, based on my recollection of our conversation the last time, just some concern about that position working on labor trafficking overall and not specifically for the marijuana program. They did state in their response that 100% of the director's time would be dedicated solely to marijuana goals and activities. And then, as already mentioned, we were curious about how that advocacy and support piece of the program would be supported through what they were proposing, and they did provide, that small 10% FTE for the volunteer director position. So that's all the questions that we had sent them. So at this point, I want to check in with you folks and just, see how you feel the responses were, if you have any additional concerns or remaining concerns from those questions. And Shannon, I see that your hand is up, so please feel free to start us off.
Yeah, and I don't know, Rima, if you can answer this. The 10% FTE, do you know if that's, so that they have a director they'd be hiring. I'm assuming that is another position that they currently have, and they'll be allocating 10% of. Do you have any insights into why 10%? It looks like there's still money available. That's just what kind of throwing me off, to be perfectly honest, is this client support and advocacy component that I would think would be significant. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was all the information they provided.
Okay.
So I could speculate, but probably wouldn't be a good idea to. Any other, questions or, oh, Shannon again.
Sorry, I was trying to unraise it. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. So yeah, go ahead.
I'll go with a general comment.
Okay.
Reviewing the application materials, the recommendation letters alone demonstrate a past pattern of being a good collaborator. So I was encouraged by that. While some detail might be lacking, as staff pointed out. I think with more detail, as Shannon just brought up, that volunteer coordinator position, I could see articulating more of a need to fund that. So generally support the application.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And again, we're really detailed when we do these reviews. We're kind of trying to capture everything that we possibly can. So I appreciate that comment. It's a relatively short application too. We ask for word limits that are pretty short, so there's not a huge amount of room for tons of detail anyways. So thank you. Any other comments or questions outstanding from members at this point? Okay. So we'll go ahead and, again, this is really the time for you folks to discuss. It sounds like from the two comments we've had, general support, still some questions, but general support for the application to move forward. So, if you folks want to discuss your possible recommendations at this point, now would be a great time to do it. We're moving even faster than I anticipated, so you guys are just super efficient. So it sounds like we have at least one person in favor of moving forward with this application for recommending funding for it. So maybe we want to start there, see if generally, the other folks on the call are in line with that recommendation. I see heads nodding.
If that's in,
Yes, I am.
if that's in the
Okay.
form of if that's in the form of a motion, I'll second the motion.
Okay. We can go ahead and do that if you'd like. Again, we generally do consensus here. We're a little bit less formal than some of the other grant review committees, just from the structure of our statutes and all that. So, if we get consensus on moving forward with the application as it is now, for full funding, that seems to be what I'm hearing. Is that where folks are at? I see nodding from at least two people.
I'll withdraw my second and just say I'm in agreement.
Yeah, me
Okay.
too. I'm used to a more, I haven't voted on this before. I'm used to a more formal, but yes, I'm
Okay.
for moving forward.
So that's 4. I think that's pretty much everyone. Excellent. Thank you for that. That was nice and simple. So we did that vote piece already. So now, we're a little ahead of schedule, but if there's public comment at this time, now would be the time for it. We'll just sit here for a minute and see if anyone has public comments. I'll just give it until 8:33. I don't see anyone raising hands or anything yet, so I'm not expecting any, but let's give it another minute. Ah. Oh. And, so, looks like someone just joined. If we can make sure to mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so if there's no public comment, we're just going to move forward at this time. All right. So the next point of discussion that we had is what should we do with this remaining funds from the 2023-25 allocation. So again, we had that total of about 9.3 million that went to our existing grantees for their budget requests to maintain or expand their current programs. So that's already, the first disbursement went out. That piece is already in progress. You know, the new application budget request for Safety Compass was only 169,858 rounding up, so we could make our disbursement schedule make sense. So our recommended allocation is at $9,432,091. So we still have about 1.6 million in remaining funds for this 23-25 allocation. So we have a couple of options of what we can do with that money. We could, you know, potentially do another round of supplemental funding for those existing grantees. I guess we could even do another RFGP process. I didn't put that option up here because based on how this last one went, it might not be the best option, but you know, you folks are free to recommend anything actually. And another option that, you know, we've been discussing internally is to roll over those funds into the next biennium. So with this particular grant, we do have that option of rolling over remaining funds into the next biennium. So I wanted to put that on the table as a possible recommendation for the commission as well. And I have a little bit of data here to kind of look at where our current grantees are at. So as I mentioned, you know, we did that round for amendments so existing grantees could get more money. Like I said, the first disbursement of that is already out the door, so that's already in place based on what they asked. So as you can see, you know, they are still going to have funds left because they requested that additional money. You know, most of them, I'll click to the second side. Overall, we're at about 47.2% expended of the total, you know, $40,912 odd dollars that now is allocated for this program. So we've expended about 19 million of it. I do want to note a couple things here. One is that I would expect that the expenditures go up next quarter. We only have, you know, 1/4 of that new funding, and I think people are we're a little bit slow to get started with those expenditures because we were waiting for the amendments to go through and all that. So I would expect this 47.2% to go up more than normal in the next quarter. And also, so I did some just really rough back of the napkin type of calculations yesterday, just to kind of gauge, you know, we had this extended contract period, which is not our usual, you know, that went for like 5.5 years or whatever the full amount was. We usually do just a biennium. So it throws off the expenditure analysis a little bit. But it looks like based on their past expenditures, we will be covered, and you know, based on their most recent budget requests, we will be covered until the end of December 2025, which is where our contract period ends, without any additional funds. You know, I'm sure folks could still come up with needs, but based on their previous expenditures, it looks like we'll be covered. And essentially what happened with that increase in funding that we just, you know, gave everyone, our existing grantees, we essentially added 1 to 2 quarters of additional monies onto their contract or their program periods that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So folks would have run out 1 or 2 quarters before the end of the contract period, and we were able to bolster that. So hopefully they'll get to the end now. So I think that's essentially what we did with that decision to fund all those maintenance and expansion requests. So that's kind of where we're at with those. So I just wanted to present that information, you know, so when you're thinking about what do we do with the next allocation or this remaining allocation, excuse me, you know, like I said, we could put it out to our existing grantees and do another kind of supplemental round, or we could roll it over into the next biennium and just have that additional bit of cushion. Since we don't know, we have the $6 million that goes every biennium, and we don't know if there'll be additional funds at this point that the legislature approves for this program. So those are two of the primary options. It looked like Tyler may have been raising his hand.
Yeah, I vote for saving it for a rainy day. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you for that. Do other folks want to weigh in on the possible recommendation for that 1.6 million?
Could we, I don't know what that means exactly.
Okay.
What does that mean? Save it for a rainy day. Is there can we just expand that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll articulate a little bit better.
Thanks, Tyler.
There's only $6 million guaranteed into the next biennium.
Mhm.
There is, a lot of law enforcement agencies that have hired positions based on this. And
Mhm.
that's a continuing struggle that they have
Mhm.
is filling positions for, a 2-year term, basically. So
Right.
any guarantee that you can give these agencies and probably the community-based organizations that there's going to be money available into the next biennium will strengthen their programs in this biennium because they have faith that they'll be able to continue their work.
Thanks, Tyler. And Tyler, we're still talking next biennium is 25-27. We're not
Yeah.
trying to think of past that, right?
No, yeah, exactly.
So I would support that. I know all of us have dealt with trying to hire on a duration, so it makes sense.
Yeah, it does take a little bit of, trying to predict what the legislature will do, which is nearly impossible. So I think that, it's really not a significant amount of money when you look at the overall grant funding. I've lost track. Did it start out at 11 million for this biennium, or it's more like 40 million, and this round is 11 million?
So for the biennium before this is where we got that big boost of
Okay.
around 25 million. And then
Yeah.
for 23-25 is when we had the regular allocation and they added an additional 5 million. So this is just for the 23-25 biennium. We just it got all, kind of convoluted together because we had that big influx of funding and then the extended grant period. So
Yeah, I would support retaining that for next biennium, I think. And I think we've talked about this from a lot of angles, but from the OLCC angle, really see that 25-27, we're going to still need this. This is just a important function, especially down in Southern Oregon. I wish we could say it was, done and not needed anymore, but that's not the case. And so I like Tyler's idea. I'd second that.
thank you, Craig and Tyler. Any other comments from members? No. All right. Well, it sounds like we have 2 votes to roll over funds at this point. And it looks like Shannon just gave a thumbs up. So that's most of the GRC members on this call. Looks like they're looking to roll over that funding into the next biennium. Oh, and then we got another one. Thank you, Chris, for giving thumbs up. So that's everyone, I believe, that's on the call. So great. We have consensus on what to do with those remaining funds. So we'll bring that recommendation to the commission as well. So thank you for that discussion and those great points. I do want to note, so, towards the end of this year, we're going to be working on our annual report that goes out January 1st. Part of that obligation that we have is to look at the expenditures and to make sort of a broad recommendation of funding levels. So, especially with all the different moving parts, we'll try and take a careful look at that. But hopefully by the time, we get to the next biennium, we'll have an even better idea of what expenditures for this program look like. So I just want to mention that. All right, so we have that. So next steps. So as I mentioned, we're going to present your 2 recommendations, which are to approve and move forward with this single application for full funding and to roll over the remaining funds into the next biennium. We'll present those to the commission and hopefully they will, come to a decision on the 28th. If your recommendations are approved, we'll start contracting with that new grantee, and then we'll roll into our end of the year activities, working on that annual legislative report. So we're anticipating, unless we get different direction from the commission, we're anticipating that we'll kind of be on pause for a little while. I'll be reaching out individually to folks about the annual legislative report stuff and any data that we've gotten from you in the past. But otherwise, we're anticipating that the next request for grant proposals, the next set of decisions that we're going to need your feedback and assistance on is probably going to happen, at the end of the next legislative session. So early next year is when we'll probably be checking in with you again if everything goes according to plan. So I just wanted to let you know we'll have a little bit of, I know we've been kind of back to back over the past few months with these meetings, so we'll have a little bit of a break, really look at the program data and do that piece of the monitoring of this program, and then come back early next year, most likely, for the next set of decisions that we'll need your assistance on. So any questions or comments about the timeline? Hopefully that makes sense and everyone, that looks normal to everyone. All right. So any other feedback or questions that any folks have at this time? And I just want to point out, this is a different new picture of my sister's dog.
Feedback is keep the Cavalier King Charles pictures. And I'll try to bring Maggie mine the next time.
Sounds good. All right, great. Well, you know what? Like I said, you guys are just so efficient, and I always really appreciate that even if we have a small group or, we go through things really quickly, there's always a good discussion, very thoughtful. So thank you guys so much. Thank you to everyone who could come today. I know scheduling is always hard this time of year, so it's really appreciated. If you have any other feedback or questions that occur to you, please reach out to me. We're always happy to show our support for this program however we can. So thank you guys very much and have a great rest of your day, I guess. Right?
Thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.